Welcome to the inaugural episode of Groong's Deep History.
Hope you like that intro music because that's going to be the intro music for this series. And Groong Deep History is a series within the Groong podcast where we won't be talking about politics. At least I think. I think we won't be talking about current politics.
So in this series, we're going to be discussing episodes from Armenian history from multiple angles and in depth. Now, given that Armenian history spans millennia, you'll quickly realize that this series can probably go on and on and on for a really long time. So if you have specific events or episodes that you would like to hear about, tell us about it in the comments under this video on YouTube or on Substack, wherever you are listening to us. If you know of a very special expert who knows your topic, tell us who that person is, and we'll see if we can get them on the show or we can talk to people that we know.
Now, in order to accomplish our goals, we'll be talking and relying heavily on experts in their field who can present the complexities, analyze what we actually know about these periods from historical sources. Some of these periods are more than 1500, thousands of years ago, essentially. And we're going to look at how they're studied, how the memory of these events is transmitted in popular culture and knowledge. And our hope, though, is to go beyond stringing names and dates, congratulatory, self-congratulatory, or even propagandistic readings, and attempt to arrive at an understanding of past events that inform our present and maybe future. And I understand that there may be different experts who have different views. So we're very much looking to have a heterogeneity of ideas as well.
Yeah, if they want to have a dialogue about their views on our show, that's going to be great. As we happen to be in February of 2026, we decided that our inaugural topic would be Vardanank, commemorating a seminal battle in Armenian history in the year 451 AD. This year, it was celebrated on February 12th, so a couple of weeks ago.
For Armenians, Vardanank is not just a battle or a war, but it is an event of epic proportions that firmly defines Armenian identity, and along with that, Christianity as part of that identity. And in terms of stories, it is as epic as they come. Did I say this was going to be epic, Asbed?
Yeah, you said it was going to be epic. I don't think there's any doubt about it.
This story is going to feature aggressive foreign superpowers that want to conquer not just militarily, but ideologically, culturally, spiritually, seeking to vanquish your soul and dismantle your traditions. Or at least we're told in history books or in school. And of course, this is many thousands of years ago, so Armenians look quite differently to our southern neighbors. But at the time, they were one of the big empires, the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire. It also features a quote friendly superpower who, at the time of need, chose realpolitik over faith and ideology. This story features the province of Sunik very centrally. It features traders, it features hostages, it features the jailing of bishops and their families. It features fake priests and fake peace treaties.
Are you sure we're not discussing today?
Yes, we are not. We're talking about a story that happened more than 1500 years ago, but it is eerily, some would say at least, is eerily familiar.
Yeah. Look, we learn about history from our schools, our school books, that the battle was only a moral victory and Armenians lost and badly. You know, we got stomped by Persian elephants, etc., only to somehow rise like a phoenix about 30 years later and gain unprecedented autonomy, religious freedom, etc. So, how did this whole thing happen? Well, we will be joined today by historian Professor Zaroui Pogossian, a specialist in medieval Armenian history, culture, and religion, to tell us what really happened and what can be learned based on historical sources. In a sense, the prologue, the log, and the epilogue.
So, all right, on with the show.
Dr. Zaroui Pogossian, welcome to the Groong podcast and to this first episode in this Groong Deep History series.
Thank you very much, Hovik, Asbed. Thanks for giving me this opportunity.
Professor Pogossian, this all started with your idea, and it got the two of us excited, and here we are. So thank you for the idea. And since this is the first time that you're on our podcast, introduce yourself to our listeners, your research interests, and why you focus, essentially, what makes you focus on the intersection of Armenian history, texts, and culture. I found some of that work that you've done, when I researched your background very fascinating. So please tell us more about it.
Thank you very much. So I'm a historian of medieval Armenian history, basically covering from 5th to 15th century. I don't really go as far as the 15th, so generally I stop around the 13th, 14th, but it's already a lot. My focus, if I can say, it's been actually very rather varied. I have studied early the Christianization of Armenia, the role of women in this process. I have studied the spread of monasticism, monastic communities, and this as a part of the control of the territory on the part of dynasts, Nakharars, as well as, centers of culture. I have studied apocalyptic literature, so how people imagined the last days of the world, how they imagined Armenia or Armenians in these catastrophic events of the world. And my book is about document which is known as Tuchtashans, which is letter of love and concord between the Armenian King Terdat and the Roman Emperor Constantine. So it purports to be a 4th century document, but indeed it was a text written during the Crusades, possibly around the time of King Levon's coronation. So I'm really fascinated by strange texts, if we may say so, which have not really been the center of scholarly research for many decades. Scholars have focused on historiography, which is more interesting, supposedly, or a lot also has been done on poetry. But I'm interested in these strange texts because they can, or at least I hope, they give us a glimpse into the aspects of ancient or medieval people's lives that do not really, well, that we cannot read easily in more canonical sources, like in more traditional historiography. And I'm very interested in the place of Armenians in the so-called global Middle Ages. We always say Armenia is a bridge between East and West, North and South. So I'm interested in what happened,
Fascinating,
how did it
fascinating.
articulate itself? Yeah, thank you.
So speaking of books, I just learned about that book, and we'll definitely link to it in our show notes. But another book, which I think we were privileged to see the manuscript of or an advanced copy of, is going to be published or is in the process of being published now. It's called Medieval Yeghegis, Armenia, History, Archaeology, Society. And the subtitle is Local Multiplicities and Global Connections in a Rural Center of the Silk Roads, plural.
Yes.
So tell us more about that and also why Yeghegis. Also, a fun fact, I have a custom background for this show, but I normally have another background that I use, which is from Sabata Bird with Yeghegis in the behind me. So that was really struck me that why Yeghegis is so important for our listeners, for our viewers.
So thank you for asking. Actually, in one of the chapters, it's a collective book. So it brings together the work that I did together with a team of scholars at the University of Florence, where I'm based, where I work, and people with whom we collaborate in Armenia. And in one of my chapters, actually, I have a subtitle called Why Yeghegis. It's an extremely interesting village. It seems so far away today from the world, tucked in the mountains. It's not easy to get there, but it's full, despite its size, just physically, it's full of very interesting monuments. Churches, the Zorat Church, the famous Zorat Church, which has very unique architectural plan. There are other churches. We discovered, or our colleague, Professor Asbed Bedrossian, discovered an inscription of 9th century in its very small church out on the outskirts of the village. It has a Jewish cemetery. It has a marble gravestone with trilingual inscriptions, Arabic, Persian, and Armenian. So, it seems like a small place out of nowhere, but there's so much going on. And the written sources tell us that there were also Latin missionaries going there. And not far from there, Thomas Aquinas was translated to Armenian. So it was
Wow.
yes, a very interesting place. So I'm very happy the book came out. We have been working on it for some years, and it will give the readers both access to its history, like written history, historical sources. I worked a lot on it, focusing especially on the Orbelians and the Prosians, these two medieval families. Most of the monuments we see in Yeghegis are from the Orbelian period, although the small church is Sunni. So, and I think if you've been to the village, there's a big 17th century church. Probably there was an old cathedral there, probably going back to the 9th, 10th centuries. So it's an extremely interesting village, and it also the way we call a rural center on the Silk Roads, because as a lateral piece of the Silk Road, we think passed nearby, and indeed there is the caravanserai of Selim not far, and other caravanserais. So the readers can read all about it. We will be doing a presentation through NASR, National Association of Armenian Studies and Research, online, so people can also listen. But the book will be open access online. Its physical copies are already ready, but the electronic copies will be ready in maybe 2 or 3 weeks.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Zaroui, can you discuss the two major sources for our topic today, which is the history of Vardanank? We know of Yeghishe, obviously, and the other is Ghazaros Parpetsi. What can you tell us about these two individuals, and is the topic of Yeghishe being a historian from a later time still a relevant issue?
Thank you. So these are Ghazar Parpetsi and Yeghishe, our two main sources for the Battle of Avarayr, and actually for the period that led to the battle. And Yeghishe stops around 464, so about 10 years after the battle, whereas Ghazar goes on to tell more details also about the generation after the Battle of Avarayr. Ghazar's book, there is a consensus that it was written before the year 500, not much before the year 500. So his book is easier to date, and it has been easier dated. Yeghishe's book is very interesting. It's not just a simple history. It's very poetic. It's full of theological argumentation, explanations. We can call, there's a technical term, hagiography, so the life of saints. It has many features of that type of literature. So it is harder to date. It is considered a literary masterpiece for early Armenian literature. Its language is very, I don't want to say flowery, unique, especially if we consider that this is only just I belong to the camp, and then I will explain why. It's only about 100 years since the Armenians had the technology of writing. So compare, like Greek literature, which we have from 5th century BC. So in the 5th century AD, it was 1,000-year tradition of writing, whereas in the Armenian case, it was just 100. But his style is very unique, poetic. It's sort of like an encomium, an ode to Vardan. And so it's much harder to date. And there have been discussions since the 19th century. It's because he has this view, we may say bird's eye view. He has a very big perspective on the events. He's not focused on what happened then, the details, which we get from Ghazar, and is wonderful for the historian. Yeghishe's views is broader. He explains the start of the war not because of a family discussion, like Ghazar says, because, Vasak Sunni was very mad at his son-in-law, Varaz Varan, who was treating his daughter badly, so he decided to kill his son-in-law. This sounds very, it's quite possible.
Sounds like a soap opera. Yes.
Absolutely.
Would you say it's a little bit like an epic poem?
Could be.
Homeric in style, the way Homer had the Iliad
absolutely.
and the Odyssey?
Yeah, absolutely. And also another point to add is, marriage in these elites that we are talking about warrior elites, right? Very wealthy, very well trained. These are soldiers. Vasak Suni is a general, is a soldier. So is Vardan, you know. Marriage is not about love. It's about political alliances. And the family feud is not just a family feud. It's a political clash. So, you know, we can't say that Ghazar is lying to us. There's no way of checking, but it's not necessary that he is lying. But what Yeghishe is saying is there is much more going on. He's putting into place the policy of Yazkert II. He's describing problems in Central Asia that Yazkert has with, at that time, so at the end of the 4th century, beginning or throughout the 5th, more or less, until the 60s of the 5th century, the big problem are the Huns, or the Hephthalites are considered to be part of them. So, and this is a problem both for the Sasanian Empire and the Roman Empire, or the Byzantine Empire. So Yeghishe has this broader view. Let's say that there is no consensus on the date of Yeghishe, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. That means that the Armenian studies is a very lively field with a lot of debates, and debates also push us to look and study the texts from different perspectives. You know, read them against the grain. Maybe we notice some things. I think Father Levon, or Sarpazan Levon-Zekan's reading and analysis of Yeghishe's work, together with other texts that are attributed to Yeghishe, makes sense to me. And there are other scholars who agree with him. You know, you don't have to have lived 100 years later to have a broad perspective on events. Even today, you know, you may have people who analyze things based on details, others who look at the global picture or who are analyzing it from different perspectives. So maybe let me just add one little thing. There is a lot of discoveries in sigillography, like seals, Sasanian seals. And, you know, the late great scholar Nina Garsoyan, she was not one to accept easy traditional datings. But in one of her very interesting articles, she's juxtaposing information in Yeghishe and in Sasanian sources and some tiny details that make sense. And it makes sense if you were close to the events. You know, 50 years later, 100 years later, these little details were no longer significant. They were forgotten. So, sorry. Yes, maybe it was too long.
No, 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 not at all. I was actually thinking while you were talking about
Yes.
100 years later, 150 years later. I mean, today we have a lot of our own grandparents and great-grandparents who were talking about what happened in the genocide as witnesses, not only as
Yes.
historians, but just, you know, in our century. But in those days, what was the state of the Armenian historiography in general? Who were these men who were writing history?
Yes. Great question. So, as we all know, the Armenian writing was invented around 405 by Mesop Mashtots. And I would say, as a historian, I think that was the greatest Armenian project, the most successful Armenian project. The first text that we have in Armenian are translations, the translation of the Bible. Of course, Koryun also tells us Mashtots set to invent these letters in order for the liturgy, for spreading Christianity. But already the translation of the Bible, the language is so rich. Again, if we compare it to Greek, right, you had hundreds, thousands of years of written culture. And you're translating the first thing. So this is a major technological change. It's going from a completely oral, not completely, I mean, they used other languages for administrative purposes, Syriac or Aramaic for administrative purposes. Greek also was known, of course, in the royal chancellery. But to write narratives, long texts, and have such a rich language and vocabulary means that there was a very strong epic tradition, oral epic tradition. And we see that also in the earliest writers, you know, Ghazar Parpetsi, especially Pavstos Puzand. So the text that dates pre-Avarayr is Koryun. And it's very interesting. It's hagiography. It's the life of Mashtots. Although he calls Patmutun Mashtots, so history of Mashtots. All the other ones, so the 5th century is considered the golden era of Armenian historiography. You may or may not accept because there are other later historians who are really important and wonderful. One of my favorites is Sebeos, he's a 7th century writer. So in a way, the writing of history is important after Avarayr, and we may think about writing of history as a resistance strategy, keeping the memory of certain events. And, that also means that when we're reading Agatangeros, who says, oh, I was a secretary after that, of course he could not be. And his perspective is that of after Avarayr. He's searching for meaning that could be sort of a theory of survival, if you wish. So who are our points of reference? Now that we
Yeah.
don't have a king, now that a lot of important Nakharars are dead, there is not clear how the situation will evolve. And I would say it's sort of like a writing of resistance. Of course, it's more than that, obviously. And it's important not only for Armenian history, but if you're studying history of the Sasanian Empire, Byzantium, Mesopotamia, the nomadic peoples, the Huns, as we said, you have to learn Armenian.
Professor Pogossian, I want to move us forward.
Hmm?
You talked about the golden age, and it is surreal because only 50 years ago, from the time that we were talking about, like 100, a lot has happened in terms of the political state of Armenia, right? Up to the point of dissolution of the Ashakuni dynasty, the death of the Catholicos, and essentially we are seeing this flowering of Armenian writing, Armenian literature, while the state is being consumed by,
Hmm.
from outside. But just to give context for our listeners who may not know, the Battle of Avarayr takes place on 450, 451 AD. Those are when the events happen. Um, the Armenian alphabet was invented 404 AD, and Armenia formally adopted Christianity 301 AD. But of course, Christianity existed in Armenia since the time of the apostles. So it's just a formal adoption of Christianity, and then only 80 years later, the kingdom is gone. Can you tell us a little bit more detail about these events that
Hmm.
eventually led to the Battle of Avarayr
Okay.
and set up the scene for us?
Yes. So again, we depend on our sources, which are Yeghis and Khazar, and we have to sort of read them critically and also look at what was going on in the world. So yeah, Hovik, you're absolutely right. So 301 is the sort of traditional date. Some scholars say it's 314, so after Constantine the Great. Others have said, well, why do we have to not look at what happened before? Well, there's definitely missionizing activity in Armenia in the 2nd century, in the 3rd century, very deep ties to the South Syriac Church. Whereas with the arrival of Gregory the Illuminator, who the Agatangeros says he was raised in Cappadocia, we have another wave of a type of Christianity into Armenia, which is connected to the Greco-Roman world. There's Hripsime, who is supposed to be Roman nun, so there is imperial connection there. And scholars who also study the liturgy of the Armenian Church, the theological terms, also indicate very, very strong connections to the Syriac Church. And this was particularly felt strongly in Taron, which is a western sort of southwestern region of historical Armenia. So it did have about 100 years history in Armenia Christianity, but we should not imagine that all Armenians were Christian at that time. A conversion is a very, very long process. Even when the king converts, let's say, and he makes, like Constantine, right? He said Christianity is a legitimate religion, and it flourished. After him, Theodosius said it's the only religion, and somehow everybody became Christian. we hear in the Greek literature, like John Chrysostom, an extremely popular author in Armenia, who is complaining, who's saying people become Christian because it's fashionable. They come to the church and women are dressed, he was extremely misogynist, women are dressed with huge earrings and they just want to attract, and everybody is talking and there's so much noise in the church. So it was a double-edged sword when your king supported the church. Okay, and I imagine a situation similar to that in Armenia. Nevertheless, it had made big inroads, particularly after the invention of the alphabet, we believe. And indeed, Gorion says, Mashtots, when he goes to retires himself to heremitic life in Gorten, so near Syunik, presumably in the region of Syunik, he realizes the majority of people don't know anything about Christianity, even if they say they are Christian. So this is the situation. Yeah, there are external pressures, but there are also internal disagreements. So, according to our sources, the last Arshakuni king, Artaxerxes or Artashir, depending whether you choose the Greek or the Persian way of calling him, he was deposed because the Nakharars were unhappy with him. And they went and complained at the Persian court that they don't want this king and he's not doing justice to whatever. His politics are not agreeable and they don't want him. And we know that Sahak Partev, at least this is, again, what our sources tell, was against it. He thought even a bad king was better than no king. But this is the perspective of the sources. We may think, okay, well, certainly there is rivalry for power, of course. Certainly, so Armenia was one of the, it's not unique to be sort of on the borders of two empires. We think it is, but it's not. So was Mesopotamia. The Christians in Mesopotamia, which had become a majority, possibly by the 5th century, they also had similar history, some persecution, but also suspicion that if you're, from the point of view of the Sasanian court, a suspicion that if you're Christian, then politically you are prone to align with the Roman Empire. Armenia was partitioned in 387 between the Roman Empire and the Sasanian Empire, and there were some skirmishes after that, but no major wars until maybe the beginning of the 6th century. So it was a very long peace, lasting more than 100 years. And when the Armenians rebel, so the sources tell us there is oppression, religious oppression, an imposition of Zoroastrians on the Armenians. But not only that, they also tell us that Yazkert did a new census, a much more accurate census. What does that mean? When you go and figure out, and they say, his vizier was really surprised that Armenia is such a wealthy land. What does it mean?
It means that at least priests, are paying taxes now.
Also the priests, yes, but that your elites, like the military elite, as I said, the Nakharars, everybody's paying more taxes. The priests seems like did not pay taxes. Now they have to. Also the monks. And you have to go to Serbia because they are fighting lots going on in the Central Asian steppe, which is the other frontier of the Persians in the east. And they need manpower, they need soldiers. And the Armenian cavalry was one of the most well-trained and most prestigious. So they are going to recruit or request more people to be recruited. So, yes, our historians are clerics. They, of course, tell us their perspective. That's natural. All the sources have their biases. But they also tell us that there is more going on. And of course, both empires are concerned about Huns. Nobody wants trouble in a border region, neither the Sasanians nor the Romans. So when the Armenians decide that they are going to sort of resist this strategy, including by military means, they send a letter of help, we are told. But the Roman Empire is not interested in breaching the peace treaty with the Sasanians. They have their own troubles. In the same 451, like 2 weeks later, there is a huge battle in what is today's France, known as the Battle of Catalonian Fields, against Attila, the Roman army against Attila. And It's very interesting. There's a lot of debate who won that battle. Some historians say the Romans did, others say, well, it was not clear, it was a draw. So you see some similarities also. I
And
don't
of
know if
course,
I
during this whole
answered.
process,
Yeah.
the Roman emperor also dies, and Marcian
Yes.
comes. I think
Yes.
in Armenian books refer to Marcian as Marcian the Cursed, or
They
something
don't
like
like him, yeah, because he is the guy who is involved with the calling of the Council of Chalcedon, which kind of became a reason. Of course, it happens later in the Armenian Church. At this point, there is communion between the churches, between the Armenian Church and the Roman Church. But slowly, the Council of Chalcedon becomes one of these dark points, that the Armenians have
Right.
to refute.
It's the
So,
schism between the two churches, right?
well, okay, as I said, it was a very gradual process. Um, and also, so there's a huge book by Nina Garsoyan about the schism. She thinks it probably materialized like strongly in the end of the 6th century, basically. So really, it takes a long time because after Chalcedon, there are also efforts on the side of the Roman emperors to mitigate the how do you say it, not the results, the situation, because it was not only the Armenian church that did not follow this doctrine, but there were huge problems in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Jerusalem itself. So then they try something else. So Emperor Zeno has an edict proclaimed, which is known as the Henoticon of Zeno. So let's say a writ of union, where he basically says it's basically considered to be a Miaphysite or Monophysite statement. And it's like 484, and the Armenian says, okay, yeah, fine. So they adopt it, and then so it's a dynamic process in a way, both within the
it's like it's like me
yes,
when I get the emails, and then 1 month later I read it, and then 2 months later I decide to respond to it, saying, "No, I'm not
yes,
going to do this,"
yes,
right?
yeah. Oh, except for life was much slower, so it would
Yes,
take
a couple
decades.
decades. Yes.
Yes. And remember that, so let me just, in order to be nuanced, there was always parts of the Armenian population that followed the imperial church. So they considered they were the ones following St. Gregory. We have a 7th century document who states, well, these other guys went and became heretics. We are the Orthodox ones. So we have that too.
Okay, so let me bring us back to I guess I want to bring us back to the death of Sahak, Bartev,
Mm-hmm.
and Mashtots,
Mm-hmm.
439 and 440, one after another. And then we have a new Persian king installed, Haskert or
Mm-hmm.
Yazkert or
Mm-hmm.
Yezdikert. I think
Mm-hmm.
they're all said the second. Um, what was the policy of the Persian or the Sassanid Empire before?
Mm-hmm.
And did it change dramatically, or was there always an antagonism towards the Christians? And also, what was the situation between the different power centers internally in Armenia, which the church, there is the Marspet,
Mm-hmm.
Sparapet.
So as you correctly say, around in 438, 439, Sahak Partev dies, and then Mashtot. But already before that, Sahak Partev had been deposed somehow by the Persian king. So he had jurisdiction only in the region of Dyke. So he did not really have uh, the rights, let's say, that we would associate with the Catholicos, and there were two Catholicos put in place. This process kind of sets into motion creative ways of how to have a Catholicos, because it used to be the line of Saint Gregory when there were candidates, but Sahak had no male sons, so often these bishops were married before, and then they decided to separate, we are told, or become widowers. And then their kids could inherit. This is very much a part of the Armenian society of the time, that functions were inherited. Svarapet was in the house of the Mamikonian, Asbed was in the house of the Bagratuni, etc. So we have
Those
that.
Sparapets are the military leaders. There's
Aswad is the
also
cavalry. There's Hazarapet, who is kind of an economic, we would say, the head of the economy to make it modern. And then there's the Marspan is a very important office. Marspan is a Persian sort of appointed by the Sasanian court after the kingdom was put to an end. The governor of Armenia was responsible for Armenia. And there were tensions between the Marspan and the Hazarapet. There could be. And indeed, we think in this time there were tensions between Vasak Sunni and the Hazarapet Vahana Matuni. The church, at least the Gregorid line, was very much aligned with the Arsacids. And they also had family ties with the Mamikonians. So presumably, according to one of the interpretations, at the death of Saint Sahak, so there were church lands which were sort of like general property, but they also had private property. So, which was a different thing. And the private property was in Taron, in the region of Taron, of the Gregorids. Let's call them like in a dynastic name. And those presumably passed to the Mamikonians. Again, if we are coming to the question of why it started, if those lands had monasteries or churches and they were tax-free, suddenly they became taxed. So you can imagine economically this was a very highly unpopular move on the part of Yazkert. So the Sasanians, we cannot say, just like we cannot say about the Roman Empire before Constantine, that they were about constant persecution of Christians. No, they were sporadic persecutions. Often these persecutions were done, like in the 4th century, in reaction to Roman moves, sort of to play out the Christians as a fifth column within the Sasanian Empire. So in 410, what happens? The Church of the East separates. They have their own hierarchy, separated from the Byzantine imperial hierarchy. And the head, the Catholicos of the Church of the East, was appointed or had to be underwritten or approved by the Sasanian court. The Armenian Church at this time, so it becomes kind of a separate hierarchy in this period. Because before then, sources say maybe until Nerses, they used to go to Caesarea to be ordained as Catholicos.
Okay.
Then it became this hereditary principle. In this period, they are actually trying to find ways of how to appoint a Catholicos. For example, then we have the mention of Hovsep, the priest Hovsep, who is present at the battle, and he's one of the people taken prisoner, and he dies in prison and is considered a martyr. He was appointed, we think, by Mesrop Mashtots. He was a trusted person of Mesrop, but his position was never ratified by the Shah. So he always appears as the representative or like vice Catholicos, or the one who sits, so never full Catholicos. So that's the situation. But no, there was no constant persecution of Christians, absolutely. This is exactly why there is this uproar when something like this happens. When Yazkert calls the Armenian nobility to the court in Ctesiphon, Vardan, Vasak Sunni, and others, and they are forced to say, okay, we adopt your religion, we're adopting Zoroastrianism. Our sources say they did it in sort of in disguise, as a way of
under duress, and then
under duress,
pretending, right?
Pretending, thinking that now if they not do it, they're going to be all killed, and it doesn't make sense. No needs for new martyrs. Let's go and try to organize a resistance, or try to see how we can get out of this situation.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to actually ask one more question, which is Yeghishe's history provides in detail a letter from Yazkert II about, you said that it wasn't constant, but do you think that there's any veracity to that letter specifically, which basically demands that Armenians relinquish their existing religion and adopt Zoroastrianism?
Look, we always have to be extremely cautious regarding specifically letters in the books. The letter, we study these histories so as literature, the point of view of the clerical class, as I said. And these are usually what the author thinks put in the, also dialogues the same. These are what the author thinks put in the mouth of the Shah. Certainly there was a pressure, certainly. But whether the pressure was expressed in exactly these terms, as Yeghishe does, that's highly doubtful. But also, I think it's Yeghishe who is saying, well, he puts this speech in the mouth of Mihr Nerseh, this very high vizier, we can say, of Yazkert, extremely important person. He's known from other sources too, not just Armenian sources, saying to the king, look, if you care about your subjects, you should care also about the soul of your subjects. So if they're not following the religion of the good, Zoroastrianism, then you're not really taking care of your subjects. This idea for that period of time, sure. One could see that happening as well.
Zaroui, there are so many questions about these 100 to 150 years. I guess we're going to drill into them at some future point, but one of the aspects that leads us to the 450s AD is the elite in Armenia, which you just mentioned at this time. They're called the Nakharars in Armenian. And at the same time, Surp Krikor's descendants are the hereditary Catholicism of all Armenians. So there are the Mamikonian family, and of course, there's they intermarry with the Nerses and the Sahak Bartev wing of the Grigorids. Tell us a little more. Who are the Mamikonians, and what's their source of affluence in Armenia?
Yes. So the Mamikonians are one of the oldest and the wealthiest families, so-called Nakharars. The society in late antique Armenia, so in this period, until let's say the arrival of Islam, but even later, the country was ruled, the territory, let's say, was controlled by these different families. About some families we know a lot, about other families we don't really know much. The main source of the affluence at the time presumably was let's say real estate, a modern term, agricultural wealth coming from working of the land, but not to be excluded also trade. And this is something very hard to find through the sources because they don't really speak about trade. The histories that we have were commissioned, at least in this period, by the families. So Pavlos Buzant has a lot about the Mamikonian family in the 4th century. So they also perceive payment for their military service for the Sasanian court. They're one of the large families, and they were positioned also in kind of a strategic location, really at the border of with Byzantine Empire, so connections both to the Roman imperial structures, and they could go on have military career in the Roman imperial structures, and the Sasanian. Very interestingly, so they are ruling also the region of Taron. And Taron is one of the oldest centers of Armenian Christianity. Even Agata Angeros, whose purpose is to highlight the importance of Echmiadzin, the vision of Saint Gregory, and the building of churches. He wants us to, he sends the message that the center of Armenian Christianity is in Echmiadzin, but even he speaks of Ashtishat, another region where Saint Gregory had founded the mother church of Armenia, so in the region of Taron. Taron probably was an older center of Christianity, most likely was the older center of Christianity before even Christianity became officially adopted as the state religion. So all of this brings us into the geographical area where the Mamikonians ruled. And there are
Is it
Parapets.
and so
Yes.
it's Daron and Vaspuragan primarily?
Well, Taron, maybe the south of Vaspurakan. Vaspurakan is further east of Van. It's a very good question. Maybe we should talk about it later, because one of the traditions of Christianization of Armenia, the legend of Saint Thaddeus, is actually localized in Vaspurakan. So in Artas, exactly where the Battle of Avarayr took place.
Right.
I haven't had a chance to delve into this myself and make sense of it. But yeah, Taron was definitely, and the Bishop of Taron was a very important member of the church. When we have the church councils, which kind of lead to the separation of the Armenian church from the Roman church, two councils in Tvin. After Catholicos, the next signatory is the Bishop of Taron. So that shows you he's extremely important.
Is the family, the
Mhm.
Mamikonian family, monolithic or in its alliances with neighboring powers? We know a few names, right? We know Vardan, we know Vasak, and then there's, of course, Vahan. Are these people all on the same page with the Mamikonian family agenda?
I wish we could have that kind of detailed information. I would say probably no. Do you know any Armenian family where there are no two cousins who don't speak to each other? It's
Never
impossible.
heard of it.
Exactly. So, you know, you can imagine when, especially when there are questions of sharing of property, dividing the honors, etc. In this period, yeah, there are some Mamikonians who don't agree, who don't participate in all the families of the time. All the Nakharars, not the entire clan participated. So in the 5th century, we are still in a situation where there is one head of the family, Danuter. And presumably the land belongs to he has the right to do whatever he wants with the whole family property and to appoint the other members. So I can imagine lots of tensions there emerging between younger sons, elder sons, cousins, etc. All the Nakharar families do not necessarily follow completely Vartan. And indeed, one of the studies that I think is very, very realistic, who counts, Ghazar Parpetsi says the Armenians had 66,000 soldiers at the battle, and the Persians or the Sasanians brought 3 times more. But a more realistic count, I recently read, and I actually sent you this article, I think it's quite possible, is probably not more than 14,000. And if we consider that not the entire, so you had to raise soldiers, you had to train soldiers, right? And each different members of your family, the sepus, for example, the younger or the lesser ranked nobility had different contingents. So it was a well-drilled army. Not everyone participated, including in the Mamikonian family. Of course, Vahan is then the nephew, so he's of the next generation. Yeah.
So what led up to 451 and how did it
Yeah.
devolve? Let's say after 25 to 50 years, how did it devolve into a battle of Avarayr?
Yes.
What stopped all the diplomatic activities
Yes.
in the world and we're off to war?
Yes. So the so the Armenians get together in, where shall I start? So there is this letter, presumably some kind of order that they have to do a new census, they have to evaluate the taxes better, as I said, and that we are told also that they have to follow this new religion and convert or reconvert actually to Zoroastrianism to be trustful subjects of the Shah. And of course, as I said, this would mean also giving more military contingents going and fighting in Central Asia against the Heftalites, the Hans, these big wars that are going on in Central Asia. So we are told that the Armenians are called this higher level nobility, which includes Vahan, Vartan, and also Badesh, which means the leader of the marchland, Ashusha, who is an Iberian, who is a Georgian. It's also very important because the Huns would come. There were two passes in the north through which they would come, the pass of Daryal in the middle of the Caucasus Mountains and the Derbent, Chorapahak in Armenian sources, sort of a region where the Caucasus Mountains and the Caspian Sea, so in between. And Vasak Suni, we know, was also positioned there as a guardian of the Chorapahak. So these are very important people. The Shah cannot have doubts about their loyalty. So they are called to the Persian court and they are forced to convert. And when they go back, with, our sources say, with Zoroastrian mobeds, so the Zoroastrian priests, who are supposed to impose fire temples throughout the country and start teaching the children of the nobility the new religion. According to Yeghishe, what happens, there is a popular uprising. This is what he says. Whether we believe him or no, we may go and we may argue that the people do not agree. Maybe that this, very likely, it's possible that the popular uprising is led by the clergy, because this is a direct attack to the institution of the church. If there were, it's very early, we don't know what monastic institution meant at that time in Armenia.
Do we have any reason to doubt Yeghishe on this issue?
No, because really, if we think about this as a power struggle, okay, the spirituality, fine. I'm not saying it didn't play a role, but you have a structure of the church which is already 100 years old. It is everywhere, right? More or less. Each family, and the church also followed this dynastic structure, as we said, not only Gregory. So the bishop of the Mamikonians probably was a member of the Mamikonian clan. The bishop of the Amatuni was a member of the Amatuni clan. So there is a network. And these people are now under threat. They are the ones who have the closest, our mouthpiece, if you want, of the population. So there's absolutely no reason to doubt that this is possibly what actually happened. They mobilized a reaction. And in a way, the nobility had to kind of harness that reaction and say, okay, so they take an oath. We are told they gather in Artashat. They take an oath on the Bible that they are going to resist the Persian army. Now, what is interesting is, okay, yes, we're told, and then they move. There is one battle in Albania, Caucasian Albania, in Nakharar, where Vardan has a victory. It's very interesting. Some scholars say maybe this battle was just as important as Avarayr. Avarayr overshadowed any other possible smaller battles, if you want, which kind of prepared and led to Avarayr. Avarayr stopped the arrival. Definitely, it stopped a major incursion into the country. Its location also speaks for it. It's presumably, we don't really know 100% where it was, but it was not far from the city of Baku in today's northern Iran. But this article I was reading recently, which I think gives a very realistic account, and he's also looking at military strategy of the time. There were manuals of military strategy. Yes, I forgot to say, the sources tell us that Vasak was trying in all ways to stop this from happening, to stop this major clash from happening.
Yeah.
And the sources say, because he was fake. Yes, please.
Yeah, this is what I meant by fake priests and a fake peace treaty. He supposedly he sent these bishops who said that, look, the Persians are going to let us keep our religion, as long as you just sort of, calm down. And then, yeah, there's a peace treaty coming, so just, relax. But Yeghishe won't have any of that, right? Yeghishe does
Absolutely not.
Right.
Yes. But this is, of course, a view from after they know that Vasak's policy didn't work.
Yeah.
We should not necessarily agree that he was faking, that he took the oath, put his hand on the Bible and he faked. Let us remember that Vasak is praised in the highest terms by Koryun, Mesrot
Right.
Mashtot's biographer. He stands out as one of the really exceptional leaders of Armenia.
Professor Pogossian, let me challenge you a little bit more. I mean, I think Vasak failed so bad that even apparently Yazkert II or Haskert was pissed off at him. But also Yeghishe goes to great lengths to say how bad of a loser he was, that he suffers a very horrible and sort of biblical, in a biblical manner, horrible death with worms and everything. And then supposedly Yazkert or Haskert, the king, the Persian Shah, is very upset because he lost so many men. Is that really what happened? What was the fate of Vasak, according to various sources?
So again, our sources are Yeghishe and Parpetsi. There's no way to know exactly how Vasak was treated while he was imprisoned, as were imprisoned the other Armenian nobility. So he wasn't the only one. And they had to also serve in the wars. Indeed, the keeping hostages is not cheap. For if they are to be useful, you can't just starve them to death. Otherwise, they are useless. You keep them as hostage because you hope that their families in Armenia are going to behave because they're worried about the life of these people. Secondly, you use them as manpower. They are soldiers. You send them, again, we hear that they're sent to fight Kidarites, Kushans, Hans in Central Asia. Yes, it's true. Vasak was a loser. That's why he gets the treatment of the loser. His policy, as I said, didn't work. His policy was probably that of passive resistance. He tried to talk out Vardan and the others, let's say the camp of Vardan, from going into the direct clash. In the end, they did go to direct clash, and he said, okay, I'm part of it. And then we were told he left in the middle of the battle. He joined the Persian side. Of course, if
He
you're,
hid behind the
yes,
elephants.
behind the elephant, of course, if you're the Shah or you are Mir Nerse, the Shah's vizier, you also somehow sleepwalk into war if you want. Either reaction, we should imagine this as a dynamic thing. The Armenians do something, they respond, they try to oppress. This oppression doesn't work, so they are moving. It's not like we don't do deterministic history. It happened, but it could also not happen, right? So if you're the Shah, if you're Mehmet says, the Shah's great vizier, of course you're not going to say that was our mistake. We were wrong. Why did we do this? Why didn't we calculate our bets better? You're going to say, well, it's his fault. He said we would try a way. He said we will find a way. This is what Khazar says. Rises up and kills the Mokbed. And supposedly the Persian representatives say, oh my God, if these poor peasants are doing this, what will happen if the Armenian army will decide to go against us? So we are given hints that they already realized this was something not to be followed. But if they did continue in the path towards war, they evaluated that it's better to go and do a crushing victory than will be okay. It didn't happen. So they have to blame someone. And Vasak's Sunnis policy didn't work, and so they blame him. Of course, the Vardan was dead. They could not blame Vardan and take him and give him a terrible death. So
Yeah.
this is
And also we should be fair to Vartan's legacy,
absolutely,
because Ghazar also mentioned that he had sons, or at least one
yes,
son, who was a hostage in the Persian court. Is that
absolutely.
correct?
Vasak's two sons, we're told, were hostages.
Okay.
There has been a whole historiography of Vasak worshippers as well, who have tried really hard, sometimes really, I was reading, ahistorically ridiculous ways. These people should be put in context, and they had their motives, they had their power struggles. We should not make a villain to a saint and vice versa. That's like absolutely useless, ahistorical. Yes, he had two sons, but sanctifying Vardan also means that we kind of lose understanding his motives. We just say, oh, he was just a great patriot. He just wanted to die for the faith. Well, he was a great soldier. He was a Sparapet. His family was Sparapet for hundreds of years. He drilled the army. He wasn't going to this battle as for a suicide. I absolutely don't think he wanted to commit suicide. And sanctifying and only looking at him as a saint precludes us from analyzing what did he think. Why did Vartan think that it was a good idea? If we turn our view and if we analyze this as a historical event, like any other historical event, sort of moving away from myths, which is not always easy. So motivation is one of the motives, is one of the hardest things for historians to gather. We don't know. Even when they leave their writings, it's very literary, flourish. They have to say certain things. We can only infer the motives, okay? But we don't think that it would be highly unlikely that a great general like Vartan would want a suicide for himself or for his army. So his strategy most likely was to incur as little losses as possible, inflicting much losses on the Persian or Iranian army. It was mixed, different people came into it as possible, and then disperse, and then just flee. The sources say they fled. They went to the various fortresses in Armenia. So we should remember, Armenia is a very difficult land to control. Very mountainous. You have to know the mountainous passes, the control of. You can even say we conquered it. Okay, they're paying taxes, but a lot of Nakharars had internal autonomy because it's very hard to control. You need to know the territory very well. So this seems to have been the strategy of Vardan. You do the resistance without huge losses, and if this article I was reading, which seemed to me more realistic, the people who fell on the battle, okay, Ghazar even says 1,000 something, he evaluates around 500. So of course, it's a lot of losses, especially for a pre-modern battle. But it's not a genocide, it's not a total annihilation. And the fact that the next
Zaroui,
generation.
what was your estimate of the sizes of the two armies again?
So it wasn't mine, but this is an article I read, which I think is quite realistic. Probably around 14,000, the Armenian for Vartan's forces, and maybe about 30, 35, the Persian forces, something like that.
Okay. That's interesting because historically we learned that it's about
Yes.
60,000 against
Yes.
300,000,
Yes. We
etc.,
never
which
take historians at their word when it comes to numbers. Never.
well, look, this is very interesting. And when we were talking a little bit about Vasak and his motivations and everything, I suddenly had visions that we might go into a Nikos Kazantzakis kind of an alternate interpretation of history to see Vasak as a saint of some sort with motive. Well, who knows? Maybe he did have some kind of realistic reasoning why he did what he did, but 1,500 years later, 1,400 years later, he is treated as the traitor. We don't name our kids Vasag anymore, and that's how history's come down,
They're good
pretty much.
Vasaks as well.
Well, there's like two or three Vasags against a million Asbeds.
Yes.
But yeah, you did mention that the strategy of Vartan was kind of a war of attrition and
Yes.
a guerrilla warfare, and that
Yes.
happened over the 30 years after, and went to 484 AD, the Treaty of Navarsag. I think, unfortunately, we may have to leave that for a future episode, where
Happily. That's one of my favorite
we
treaties.
knew
Peace
this would
treaties.
happen, that we would end up with you just cutting off in the middle of a very interesting story. But we will come back. We promise that we will come back.
I will
So,
happily come back.
yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, well, Hovik, anything else?
A lot, but let's just leave it here. I think that we want to make these episodes short enough so that people continue watching us, and we will
Okay.
be back with the next 30 years, I think, in another episode, or maybe,
Happily.
yeah, yeah.
Happily.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
so
Bogossian.
much.
We look forward to that discussion.
Me too. And thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
The pleasure is all ours.
That's our show today, the inaugural episode of Groong's Deep History. This episode was recorded on February 23, 2026. We've been talking with Dr. Zaroui Pogossian, who is a specialist in medieval Armenian history, culture, and religion, especially in relation to other peoples, cultures, and religions in West Asia. She is Associate Professor of Byzantine Civilization at the University of Florence and the Principal Investigator of the prestigious European Research Council project Armenia Entangled, Connectivity and Cultural Encounters in Medieval Eurasia, 9th to 14th Centuries. There's a lot more information about Dr. Bogossian in our show notes, so click over to her bio and check it out. podcasts.groong.org/episode number.
All right. Well, that was truly a very exciting and interesting episode. We want to hear from our viewers and listeners, of course, any feedback on how to improve, what to cover. And I like your background that you chose for this episode.
I like your background, Hovik. What is your background?
So it's AI generated, but I think it's realistic. It's Surp Karapet. When they say Mishro Sultan Surp Karapet, it's the famous monastery in Daron, which we talked about during this episode. And my part of my family is from Mush, so I definitely I thought this would be appropriate. It was either that or
It's great.
yeah, one of the kingdoms of Artsakh, but I think this is more appropriate for this episode.
Yeah. How did you get the computer to generate it for you?
I mean, I just gave him the drawings and pictures of Surpkarapet, and I told it to sort of, draw a realistic depiction of the church, but also during Easter. So I don't know if you can see, but yeah, I mean, it looks nice, and I think that this would probably look what it would look like during in the 1400s or even earlier. So
Yeah, it's great.
yeah,
It is from
it's
ChatGPT, and mine is as well. And you know what I did? I just went basically to ChatGPT and I said, what do you know about the Battle of Avarayr in the year 451 AD? And it went, here, I'll tell you. It went to find a little bit about it, and it said it's from Wikipedia. And it said, do you want me to discuss how it was deployed? And basically, I said, yes, tell me a little bit about the tactics of the battle and whatever you know. And so then I said, now that you know everything about the tactics, why don't you generate a fictional image of the Battle of Avarayr at dawn as the two armies were amassing at on the shores of the river? And it got me a few
yeah.
pictures like this, and it's just, they're great.
Yeah, and
So,
I looked at the results. Of course, it's interesting that ChatGPT, for whatever reason, really insists on a specific banner for the Sasanians, and that's not right now the flag or the banner that you have is not what the Sasanian banner is, but it's interesting that it keeps wanting to use that one because I saw that
let me
across
see.
multiple.
Is it this one that has the right
Uh,
banners?
I think none of these, well, they're too small, maybe, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, you have
Anyway.
to catch some of those things, but so it tries to cheat whenever it can. But
It has its
I'll
strengths
say
and
one
weaknesses.
about Surp Karapet. I think it reminded me that recently a friend of ours shared a book with me. It's the travels of Simeon from Poland, Simeon Lehaci, and he traveled all the way from Poland to Police, and then east all the way to Mush. Mush was his last and what do you call it? Waypoint in his diary, and I mean, it describes the very dire situation of Armenians, but also uh, the glory of Saint Carpet and some of the places he visited. He also visited Venice and Rome. So it's amazing. I mean, it took him, he thought he was going to be like out for a couple of years, but it took him like more than a decade to do this trip.
Yeah, I'm
And I
not
hope that,
surprised.
yeah, I hope we can cover that book in a future episode of this series. If you know any historian who specializes on that work, the travels of Simeon from Poland or Simeon Lehaci, we would appreciate to be connected to them. Um, but yeah, I mean that was the one of the, that was one of the in my mind. I was saying we should do an episode on this book. So anyway,
Okay. Well, thanks for listening. Don't forget to support us. Podcast.groong.org/donate if you can. Otherwise, please share our shows. We look forward to your feedback in the comments on our videos or on Substack. Hovik also wants to always remind us that we are on Apple Podcasts, so subscribe to our podcast. Don't forget to give us a 5-star review. Thank you so much.
yeah, of course. So like, comment, share, subscribe, and we have to add a new thing that you can do, which is called hype. So if you're watching us on the mobile app on YouTube, whether it's iPhone or Android, Besides liking, for smaller channels, there is this thing called hyping, and you can hype up to 3 videos a week. So please make sure to hype us so that we are given a little extra boost.
This show should be a really good one to hype.
Yes.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Take care.